Hello weekend warriors, welcome back to the workshop. Today it's all about box joints, just like I promised in the last video. You can see here's just a few examples of using box joints, and of course this guy's not very pretty, but this was one of my test subjects and I turned it into a usable box for all my little bits and pieces for the Shopsmith. Another example, a redwood cribbage board with a sliding top. Like you saw in the last one, my router pin box, or my router bit box, pardon me. So you can see various uses, some of them utilitarian, some of them can be decorative depending on the kind of wood you're using and how much contrast you get, how much end grain you're going to show. You can see that with plywood, box joints might not be the greatest joint in the world, but they are still effective. Even my little test piece here, it's strong as heck, it's not glued together, and guy's perfectly square, and I really can't pull it apart all that easy. So when done right, box joints can be an excellent joint to use. So now what we're going to do, and we're only concentrating on making the box joint today, we're not going to worry about actually building a box. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the construction of box joint jig for the router. In this case, I'm using the Shopsmith in a vertical router mode under table. So we're going to take a look at this little gem here and how to set it up for this kind of box joint. Now, all this said, the technique we're using today with the size of the joint we're using today is great for small boxes. If I'm going to go for a larger box, or say a drawer like I've done in the past, I'm going to use my my table saw, or my machine in table saw mode, and I would use my Screw Advanced box joint jig and a dado blade set. But for small ones, 1/4 inch, 3/16, even 1/8 inch like we have on the router box here, I'm going to stick more toward the router, and I'm going to use this size jig. So this is more of the small-sided box, small joints. So that's what this whole router bit is good for. All right, so let's just get on the tool. Let's look at the setup of the jig, and then let's cut ourselves some joints. Let's start off by looking at the construction of the jig itself. Now, it's pretty simple. It's a butt joint box. My base and my face are butted together. You can see that the face will ride down on the tabletop. I have two sides just keeping everything nice and square and holding it together so I can put pressure on it. It's not going to flex on me. One side, I always have a little extension here that acts as a end stop for whatever faceplate I end up putting on, because the box face is not my final face on this guy. For one thing, it's plywood, and plywood doesn't really lend itself to the smaller box joints. As you can see some tear out right in the middle here. That's because there's just not enough material in between the two slots there. So I have to use a different face, so I make a sacrificial one. And that's what we'll take care of in a moment. Anyway, so it's basically a box nice and square with runners set up to fit my miter slots on my table. Now, the first miter is kind of put on independently. And all I do is make sure it's put on square, I glue it in place, and then I shoot 3 staples into it in this case. And these are just 5/8 staples shot out of my pneumatic gun. The next runner, I place down into the miter slot, and I make sure that it's pretty much the same distance out from the original one, from the first one. And what I do is I put a couple of beads of hot glue along with a string of wood glue. While the glue is still hot, I place down in the miter slot, and I place the box down over the top of it. So now I know this one is square to the face. I know this one is the equal measurement from the original one. So I know I'm going to have a nice sliding box with no play in it. And you can see there's the only movement, I'm moving the whole machine and not just the jig. So that's the initial setup. Now, for each size of router bit I'm going to use, I have to use a different sacrificial plate. The idea here is you're going to give your workpiece a lot of support on the back end. So when the router bit penetrates and goes through, you're not going to get a bunch of tear out of the material. Like you see over here, down inside that slot. Now, bring that up a little bit closer so you can really see it. See all the tear out in there. And that's because it was unsupported when I did the original cuts. So let's do a faceplate. Now, in this case, my faceplate is a piece of fiberboard that I've just cut down into size. Now, I want to get this guy mounted so I can take it off, I can put it back on, and it's always got the same mount points. So what I've done is I've drilled some pre-mounting holes in here, and they go all the way through the faceplate. So now all I have to do is bring that guy up nice and tight and find my clamp. Find my clamp it into place. And now using my cordless drill, oops, would help if I was going the right direction. There we go. Now I know it'll mount up right where I want it to mount up. And just to be sure, I'm going to mount it. There we go. So now my sacrificial plate is in place. Now I have to make two cuts. I have to make one for the router bit, and one for my spacer pin. I'm always going to start with the router cut first because of the direction of the cut. If I had a blank space here and the cut, well, here, let me show you what happened. I did this so y'all could see. If you start with the pin cut, the spacer pin, and then come over here and try to cut, well, once again, the direction of the router bit is going to take out a small layer. In this case, it took out the outer hard layer, leaving me with a gap. Now, that gap could cause me to have tear out on the workpiece. So this is just an old scrap one. So now I'm going to cut this one here. So the first cut is going to be for the router bit. But before I get started on that, I got to set the height of the blade or the bit. So to do that, I'm going to bring I've got some setup bars. This one's my 1/4 inch. And I need to get my up close glasses. There we go, my up close glasses. Now I can raise the height. And I'll use my second bar to make sure that I am of a proper height. And that looks pretty darn good to me. And it feels good to me. Okay, so now it's just a matter of making the cut. I don't need the clamp at the moment. Now, as I put material in, this bit is going to get raised, and that is going to get deeper. But for now, that's a good depth. Now I want to cut the hole for my pin. So to do that, I'm going to unmount the faceplate. And I have to go get one of my other setup bars. So now I have my 1/2 inch setup bar, because the distance from that edge to that edge is 1/2 inch. So I'll put that setup bar in place. Make sure I'm real tight up against it. Clamp the guy up and get him going. Okay, now you might be able to see a little feather edge here, and I'll just trim that off because it's going to be square with the hole when I'm done, and I'll be ready to start cutting. Okay, now we're set up. I've got my 2 cuts done. I've got my faceplate remounted. I have my spacer pin inserted into the spacer block. Now what I have to do is I have to adjust the router bit for the depth of the material I'm going to be using. So it's just a matter of, in this case, it's a matter of grabbing the handle and raising the bit, and then using the second piece I'm going to be using for my test, and making sure that I'm not too high. There we go. Once that's perfect, I'll recheck again, and that looks good to me. So I'm ready to make my cuts. Now, something I do is I always want to check and mark the side I want to start with. That way I don't get mixed up and have a pin here and the wrong pin on the other side. I'm making sure I'm getting the proper size pin in the same spot on both ends of the workpiece. I also want to mark the face to say that I want in. So I'll put an I on the inside face. And I'll do the same thing on that guy. And it makes a difference when you're done making your cuts. So that's my in, that's my start edge. So this guy I'm going to start, and the first cut I'm going to have a pin and then a slot. So it's going to be a 1/4 inch pin, then a 1/4 inch slot. And I'm already set to do that just with the spacer block we have there. Now, for the purposes of the video, I'm going to be drawing the jig toward me instead of standing behind it. I'll do this sometimes because it allows me to make sure that I'm not messing up. I can see where the bit is going to cut before it starts. And there we go. Because it's a 1/4 inch bit, it's a 1 1/8 inch workpiece. So I have a pin, slot, 1/2 a pin. Looks good to me. Now I'm going to flip it upside down. I still have the same start side going toward the pin. And I can make the next set. And there we go on that side. Now I want to make the opposite side. So when I started this, I had the inside facing out. On the next piece, which is going to be the opposite cuts, I'm going to have the inside facing in to start. And my first piece becomes part of my setup because I want to start by cutting a slot instead of a pin. So now we're going to start out just like that. And it's going to take two hands because I want to keep both pieces steady. All right, now that I've got the start for this piece, I can go ahead and cut it up and finish it. All right, now we're ready to dry fit. So let's get these guys together, and I've got myself a perfect set of joints here. They're nice and tight. They're nice and even. The pins end up flush. So the technique is sound. I'll go ahead and cut my next two sets for the other two blocks, and we'll move on from there. So I'll be back. And there you have it. Box joints made easy. With that jig, I've done this little test piece, which is about 3 inches wide, and then I got my 1 inch one, or 1 1/8 inch one. Once again, neither one of these is glued together, yet both of them are just perfectly square with just pressing with my fingers. And once again, they're not coming apart just with an easy yank. I actually really have to work to pull them apart. So once these guys are glued up, they're going to work great. A little bit of sanding, and the faces are nice and smooth, and they're looking gorgeous. So I'm happy with the way the jig's working out. My technique is sound. So when it's time to move on to making a real box, I know I'm ready to go. So that's about it for this one. The next time around, we are going to go for, let me find the right box here. Oh, here we go. We're going to go for mitered corners. So corners cut at a 45-degree angle, and we're going to look at, number one, setting up to cut those for an even box, and also for gluing it up and holding it in place while it cures. Because with the box joints, with the tongue and rabbet joint, those things kind of hold together by themselves. Whereas with the miter joint, it needs a little bit more help, and it's a little bit more difficult. So there we have it. So next time, and until then, I'll see you later. Bye.